Chapter 18 of It Happened in Egypt. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. It Happened in Egypt by Charles Norris Williamson and Alice Muriel Williamson. Chapter 18. The Assuat Affair. Nothing could be less appropriate to the spirit of the Nile than our spirit in setting out. We had turned our backs upon medieval Cairo, and our faces toward Ethiopia. Our minds should have teemed with thoughts of early gods and the mysteries of their great temples. But not at all. Medieval or prehistoric, it was all one to us in our secret hearts, which throbbed with passionate excitement over our own small affairs of today and tomorrow. Little cared we, as our white boat bore us southward, on the bosom of the sacred river, little cared we for the love story of the great enchantress, pupil of magician Thoth, fair Isis, in whose honor that boat was named. Her tragic journey along this river, whose streams she could augment by one sacred tear, should have been followed by our fancy. We should have seen with our mind's eyes the lovely lady asking news of the painted boat which carried the dead body of her murdered husband Osiris, asking always vainly until she thought of questioning the little children. But instead we thought of our own love stories and amusements. We played bridge, and danced the tango on deck. We drummed on the piano, or warbled the latest musical comedy airs. Above all, we flirted, or gossiped about those who flirted, if for any reason we were off the active list of flirters ourselves. To be sure, we had brought learned books, and took pains to leave them in our chairs, open at marked passages of deep interest to students. We even scribbled heterogeneous notes, if for a moment there were nothing more amusing to do, and bits of paper scampered wildly about the deck informing those who retrieved them that Nub was ancient Egyptian for gold, that Osiris created men and women from the tears he wept over his own body, cut in pieces by Set, that the ivy was his favorite plant, or that scarabaeus was the Greek word for a blue-green beetle, which created itself from itself, becoming the symbol of eternal life. All this, however, was affectation. Each hoped others might think that he or she was not an ordinary tourist, each wished to pose as a devotee of some phase of history concerning gods, temples, or portrait statues, anything not difficult to study up. But life was too strong for us. The colour and glamour of the Nile got into our blood. Hathor, goddess of love, bewitched us into doing queer things which we should not have dreamed of doing if we hadn't drunk Nile champagne. Yet after all, what did it matter? We were absorbing what our hearts, if not our minds, called for, the enchantment of Egypt. More or less conscientiously I performed the duties Sir Marcus Lark had bribed me to perform. I gave neat little lectures, and tried to remind people, whether they liked it or not, that almost every moment the boat was taking us past places of astonishing interest. The so-called tombs of Beni Hassan, the enchantress Isis stopped for us to see, in order that we might admire wall paintings in rock chambers, and gabble about Queen Hatshepsu or King Seti and his mother Pakhet, the beautiful lady of the Speos. But it was difficult to rouse emotion concerning things which we glided by without visiting. Ruined temples were everywhere, thick as flies, as I heard Harry Snell say to Enid Biddle, but why bother about them when finer ones were waiting further down on the menu card of the Nile meal? Especially when there was a pretty girl to walk the deck with meanwhile. As for Tel el Amarna, the heretic king's great city, the general vote went against a visit to the ruins. Antoun Effendi praised it as one of the most interesting places near the Nile, because with the exception of Queen Hatshepsu and Ramses the Great, Amenhotep IV was the most human personality in Egyptian history. But only Mani, who was making a hero out of Akhenator, really wished to delay at the disk worshippers' Utopia. It must have seemed strange to the gilded rolls not to have her will prevail, but there was a clique on board who appeared to find pleasure in thwarting Mani. Her sacrifice to the Harlows was misunderstood. She had made it, said those who did not like her, in order to gain credit for unselfishness, or to have an excuse for displaying herself en route to the public bath, in a dream of a dressing gown and a vision of a cap, carrying a poem of a sponge bag. Rachel Guest was still mysteriously more popular than Monny, and was said to have had 2 proposals on the first day. She didn't want to get off the boat to see irrelevant painted pavements in the harem of Akhenaton's royal palace, and her laziness won when the vote was taken. But what did anything matter if the glamour of the Nile was in our blood? Not one of us but thrilled to the droning cry of the shadoof men on the brown banks, as the dripping water jars went up and down, tier after tier above the river level. Not one but felt a strange allurement in the passing scene, the dark mystery of palm groves, whose slender stems were prison bars against the shining sky, the copper glow of the mud bricks in piled up villages, the colour of the flowing water, where secret gleams as from flooded gold mines seemed to glint through masses of dead violets, and floated with the tide. No eye so dull that it could not see how the shadows on land and water were painted at evening with a blue glaze, like the bloom on old scarabs and mummy beads, and broken bits of pottery that art cannot copy now. In her way, even Miss Hassett Bean felt the charm of the Nile, and its shores of brown and emerald and peacock purple. "I don't call it scenery," she explained, "except when the light is different, or there's some green stuff for cattle growing on the banks. Everything's the same yellow-brown, and nothing happens but palms and mud villages and shadoofs, and a few Arabs, or camels, or those ugly water buffaloes they say the devil made, to show what he could do. But the funny thing is, you can't bear to shut your eyes for a single minute for fear of missing a tree, or a mound, or one of those tall-masted gyassias loaded with white and pink pottery. They all seem so ridiculously important, somehow. Then there's that bothersome north wind following you, and trying to freeze your spine, unless you pounce on the best seat where it can't reach. And if you put on your fur coat you're too hot, if you don't you're too cold. At night your bed creaks, and so does everybody else's. You hear a creaking all down the line when people turn over, which gets on your nerves. But you soon forget, and the whole experience is so perfectly wonderful that I'd like to spend the rest of my natural life going up and down on a Nile boat." Through the opalescent dream of these first days and nights shot the fiery thought of our mission in Asiut. I had been surprised at first that Anthony, who knew so well the dangers and mysteries of the East, encouraged Miss Gilder to meddle in so delicate an affair, and there had never been any explanations between us. But I told myself that his motive was sympathy with Monny's desire to help, or else he had been tempted to associate himself with her in an adventure where again, as once or twice before, he had been able to win her gratitude. Perhaps both motives combined. As for Mrs. East, she frankly sulked. Intuition told me that she had never dared speak to Antoun Effendi about the proposal in hieroglyphics, so difficult for me to explain, which she attributed to him. Never had she dared say, "You have written me a love letter. Why don't you follow it up, and give me a chance to answer it, one way or the other?" But it was puzzling her, disappointing her, if not breaking her heart, that he avoided rather than sought her, on this glorified houseboat where the Egyptian prince was more or less a hero with romantic women. While we four planned, in thrilling whispers, how to rescue the ship's mystery, and Rachel Guest walked the deck with Bill Bailey or Harry Snell, Cleopatra was reduced to writing picture postcards. I thought, if Sir Marcus had but the inspiration to reappear at some stopping place farther on, she might be ready to forgive him the false lotus flowers, and perhaps he would come, for the lark type is as difficult to snub as Cleopatra's Needle. I was half inclined to send him a telegram, on some excuse or other. We came to Asiut in the morning, and it was to be a long stop, for there was much to see, and every one was excited at the thought of our first Nile town, a town already of Upper Egypt, which made it seem that we had come a tremendous way from Cairo. For us, Egypt existed no longer as a country, but as a golden brown, purple-green river bed, and a flowing stream of history on which we floated, so it was for fun for those having no special mission, to feel that once again bazaars and more or less sophisticated sights awaited their pleasure. I had given my after-dinner lecture the night before, trying to behave as if I were not boiling with emotion, and had told those who deigned to listen that Asiut, City of the Wolves, was the capital of a province. I had babbled, too, about the tombs which self-respecting tourists must see, even if they hurry over the inspection of carvings, cartouches, and representations of very small queens smelling very large lotuses. Most Egyptian queens, apparently, spent much of their time, lightly clothed and smelling lotuses, a ladylike pursuit for those about to have their portraits taken,